Montana Territory, spring of 1883, the kind of morning where the wind cut clean and the sun rose slow over the pines like it was unsure whether the land was ready for another day. Tessa Hale stepped off the eastbound stagecoach with a satchel in her hand and her chin held high, though her fingers trembled around the worn leather strap. Her dress was a pale lavender, fine but travel-wrinkled, and her eyes scanned the muddy street of Hollow Creek like she was looking for someone who might not want to be found. She was 25, too old by Boston standards to be a new bride and too fragile, according to her sister, to survive a week in the West. The letter she clutched said otherwise. She was a mail-order bride, sent for by a man named Caleb Dunn who stopped writing 3 weeks ago. The last letter had been vague, something about needing a mother for his children, someone gentle, someone kind. Tessa had those things to give. What she did not have was news from him since. A man reached for her bag. "You alone, miss?" "I can carry it myself," she said quickly, stepping back. He shrugged and walked off, spitting into the dirt. The station agent, a round man with a sweat-stained hat, eyed her with pity. "You the lady supposed to marry Caleb Dunn?" Tessa nodded, her stomach twisting. "He ain't come into town in near a month. Some say he got cold feet. Others say he went up to Elk Ridge and never came back." "What's Elk Ridge?" "Old mining land. Empty now, mostly." "You sure you want to wait?" She nodded again, slower this time. "Yes, I'll wait." The agent sighed. "Suit yourself." By late afternoon, she was sitting on the porch of the town's only boarding house, her hat in her lap, trying not to cry. That was when he saw her. Across the dusty street, a man stepped out of the livery stable, tall and broad-shouldered, sunburnt and scarred, with a limp in his right leg and a deep ridge of an old burn down the side of his jaw. His name was Hayes Granger. He had not planned to look twice. But he did. And then a third time. Because the woman on the porch looked like she did not belong, too refined, too clean, but she was holding herself like she was trying not to break, and something about that sat hard in his chest. He crossed the street without thinking. "You waiting on someone?" His voice was low, rough from years of dust and silence. She looked up. Her eyes were blue-gray, sharp and tired. "I was," she said. "But now I think I might have been foolish." He nodded once. "You here for Caleb Dunn?" "Yes." "He's dead," Hayes said flatly. Her breath caught. "Found him last week up near Elk Ridge." Wagon tipped. "Looks like he'd been trying to get firewood. Left 2 kids behind. They're up at my place now." Tessa blinked hard. "His children are alive?" "Yes, ma'am. Boys 6, girls 4. Names are Dorian and Daisy. Real quiet. Real scared." She stood, dazed. "I was meant to be their mother." Hayes studied her then. "You still want to be?" She straightened her spine a little. "Yes." He nodded again, slower this time. "All right. Why are they with you?" "Caleb was my friend. I buried him. Rode the kids out on my horse. No one else stepped up." She looked at him a long moment. "You are very kind." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just could not leave them there." The next morning, she rode with him. He offered her the steadier horse. Said nothing when she stumbled mounting. Said nothing when her dress caught on a branch. But she saw the way he kept pace beside her, his hand near his holster, his eyes scanning the trees. The cabin was a day's ride from town, tucked into a hill where the forest opened wide and the mountains loomed tall behind it. Smoke curled from the chimney. When she stepped through the doorway, 2 faces peeked out from behind a blanket hung in the back room. "Dorian," Hayes said gently. "Come here." The boy came out first. He had dark hair and pale skin, wide brown eyes that looked too old for his age. "This is Miss Tessa," Hayes said. "She came to take care of you and Daisy." The boy stared. Said nothing. Behind him, a small girl with tangled curls clung to his leg. Tessa knelt slowly. "Hello, Dorian." "Hello, Daisy. I am very glad to meet you." Neither answered. Tessa did not push. Instead, she looked around. The cabin was clean but plain, with a single long table, a stove, and 3 narrow beds. There was a wooden cradle, empty but well built, tucked near the hearth. Blankets were folded with care. A small tin of buttons sat on the shelf. Hayes watched her take it all in. "You will sleep in that corner," he said, pointing to the bed with the quilt. "I will be out in the barn. You do not have to give up your bed." "I do." She said nothing more. The first week passed slow. The children would not speak to her, but they let her comb their hair, let her cook them stew, let her sit beside them when night came and the wolves howled far off in the trees. Hayes was quiet, always nearby but never close. He fixed the fence, chopped wood, came in late with snow on his shoulders and smoke on his clothes. One night, after the children were asleep, she found him standing on the porch, staring out at the dark. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. He nodded. "I did not think I would last even a few days," she added. "You are still here?" "I am." He turned to look at her. "You are not fragile." She blinked. "Everyone back home said I was. They were wrong." The next morning, just before sunrise, she stepped outside to find him already there, sitting on the porch steps with a cup of coffee in his hand. The sky was soft with peach and gold. "I could not sleep," she said. He shifted, making room beside him. She sat. They watched the sun rise between the trees, lighting the world with slow, quiet fire. He looked at her, then really looked. And she looked back. Neither spoke. But something passed between them, clean and strong and certain. It was the first time she realized she was not alone here. And the first time he realized he wanted her to stay. By the second week, Tessa had learned the rhythm of the cabin. Morning light came in slanted through the eastern window, catching the dust in quiet swirls. Dorian rose early but waited until she stirred before slipping from his blanket. Daisy lingered longer, sometimes curling into her brother's side before daring to reach for the cup of warm milk Tessa left ready near the hearth. Hayes was always gone before the children woke, returning with the scent of pine and sweat on his shirt, his boots damp with creek water or streaked with clay. He never explained where he'd been unless she asked. And when she did, he answered plainly. "There's a trap down near Alder Run I check most mornings. Caught a snowshoe hare yesterday. Left 2 more lines upriver." Tessa had started keeping a journal, scribbling short entries after the children had gone to sleep, her candle burning low near the shuttered window. She didn't write about loss or fear. Not anymore. She wrote about Dorian's quiet courage, Daisy's sudden laughter when she traced a spoon through cornmeal batter, and Hayes Granger's silence, the kind that didn't feel empty. One morning, as she was shaking out the bed linens, Hayes returned carrying a coiled rope and a broken wagon wheel. "Found it near the old trade road," he said, setting it down beside the door. "Could be useful for something." She glanced up from the basin. "You keep things others would leave behind." His eyes lingered on her face a moment. "Some things are worth mending." Later that day, a storm rolled in fast from the west. The air thickened and the sky turned the color of old pewter. Hayes came in early, brushing rain from his hat. "We'll need to bring the goats inside," he said. "Shed roof won't hold under wind like that." Tessa followed him out, skirts gathered, boots sinking into the wet earth. He showed her how to guide the animals with calm hands and firm steps. When the wind picked up, she flinched once but didn't turn back. Inside, with the storm pressing against the walls, the children huddled close while Tessa read aloud from a book Hayes had pulled from a trunk in the loft. The pages were yellowed, the cover cracked, but the words still held warmth. When she finished, Dorian didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. That night, after the children had fallen asleep curled together on the straw mattress, Tessa stepped out to find Hayes in the barn, oil lantern lit low on a beam, mending boot leather with a needle and string. "You never say much," she said, leaning against the post. He didn't look up. "Words don't fix much." "No, but they build things too." He glanced at her then. "What are you building?" "I'm not sure yet," she murmured, "but I think it has your name in it somewhere." The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was filled with the sound of rain on the roof, the soft creak of the barn settling, the hush of something unspoken but not unwelcome. He set the boot aside. "You're not like I expected," he said. "I'm not like anyone expected. I don't think you came here to be saved." "No," she said. "I came here to save what's left of me." He stood then, slow from the stiffness in his leg, and stepped close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the way the scar on his jaw pulled slightly when he frowned. "You've done more than that already," he said. She didn't answer, just reached out and gently touched the frayed edge of his shirt sleeve, smoothing it with her fingers like it mattered. Behind her, the wind eased. The rain thinned to a whisper. And in that barn, beneath a roof patched with care and grit, something settled between them, quiet but sure. In the following days, the children began to change. Dorian took to helping Hayes split kindling, mimicking his posture, his silence. Daisy followed Tessa into the garden patch, her small hands patting soil around early seedlings. No one said much, but the way they moved around each other had shifted. The fear had dulled. The waiting had passed. One evening, as dusk fell soft over the ridge, Tessa stood at the table brushing crumbs into her palm. Hayes stepped up beside her, holding a slip of paper folded into thirds. "Found this in Caleb's saddlebag," he said. "Figured it was yours." She took it carefully, recognized her own handwriting. Her final letter, the one she'd sent just before leaving Boston. "You never read it?" she asked. "Didn't feel right?" She unfolded the page, read the words she'd written weeks ago in a room filled with lace and silence. Then, slowly, she held it out to him. "Maybe it does now." He took it, his fingers brushing hers. Their eyes met again, no fear, no question. Just something growing. Strong and steady. Like spring after hard frost. Neither said it out loud. They didn't need to. By the third week, the land had softened. Snowmelt ran in thin ribbons through the gullies, and the mule deer came lower, trailing their young. Tessa opened the windows during the day, letting in air that smelled of wet bark and pine needles. Daisy had started humming to herself while stirring porridge, her thin shoulders relaxing more with each morning. Dorian still watched everything, but now he sometimes nodded when Hayes gave him a task, and once, when Tessa handed him a carved spoon to help serve, he didn't flinch. Hayes noticed the way she never spoke over the children, how she waited until they looked her way before saying anything. It wasn't patience out of duty, it was something gentler, stitched from instinct and intention. He'd seen preachers speak quieter in sanctuaries than she did at the table. That evening, as the sun sat low and wide across the trees, Hayes came in with a fish wrapped in oilcloth and a gash just below his thumb. She set the basin down. "That's deep. It's clean. It still needs binding." "Sit." He hesitated, then sat at the long table while she brought her sewing kit and a strip of linen. She worked quietly, her hands steady. When she tied the knot, he didn't even wince. "Been stitched before?" she asked. "Once. Back in Kansas. Bullet in the shoulder. A doctor said I should have died." She looked up. "But you didn't." "No, you're stubborn then." "Maybe." She folded the linen ends neatly. "Or maybe you just had something left to do." He watched her fingers press the knot flat. Then his gaze lifted. "You weren't supposed to stay. I wasn't supposed to find children who needed me," she said. "Or a man who doesn't speak unless he means it." He stood, slower than usual. "Come with me." They stepped outside. The air was cooling, the sky streaked with rose and pale indigo. He led her down the slope past the shed, past the place where the creek bent in a curve and gathered in a shallow pool. There, beneath the tall pine, sat a bench made from a felled log and two smooth stones. "I used to bring them here," he said, "before you came." Tessa sat slowly. "To quiet them? To remind them the world's bigger than what hurts." She looked out across the water. "It's beautiful." He didn't answer right away. "Then I thought I could keep them safe out here. Keep the past away." "You've done more than that." He turned toward her. "You changed this place." "No," she said. "I just saw it for what it was. A place waiting to be whole again." Hayes stood still a long moment. Then he sat beside her, elbows on his knees, the side of his leg just near hers but not touching. "My mother died when I was 13, he said, voice low. "My pa drank himself mean. Left by the time I turned 16. I joined a cattle drive to Wyoming. Never looked back." Tessa didn't interrupt. "I never planned to settle. Then Caleb wrote. Said he needed help. I owed him more than I ever repaid. Now he's gone." Hayes nodded once. "And you're here." She looked at her hands. I came ready to marry a man I didn't know. That feels foolish now. It wasn't. She turned toward him. Why not? Because it brought you here. The breeze stirred her hair, a loose strand catching across her cheek. She pushed it back, eyes never leaving his. Hayes. He didn't speak, just met her gaze, steady and open. I'm not afraid, she said softly. I can't offer you soft things. Not lace. Not ease. I didn't come for lace, she said. I came to build something with what's been broken. He reached for her hand. Just that. No rush. No demand. His rough palm closed gently around her fingers and she let it. You've held this place together without asking for thanks, she said. Let someone hold it with you now. He looked down at their joined hands, then back up. You sure? Yes. For the first time, his face shifted something unguarded. Something like peace, not joy, not surprise, just the easing of a long-held ache. I'll make room in the barn loft, he said. She smiled. You'll make room in the house. Hayes chuckled, quiet and low. Yes, ma'am. The creek ran soft beside them. A red-winged blackbird called once from a nearby branch. Tessa leaned slightly into his shoulder, and he didn't move away. Back at the cabin, the lantern light glowed behind the shutters, steady and warm. Nothing needed to be said. Not yet. What mattered had already begun. By mid-April, the land had turned green in earnest. Patches of wild onion pushed through the soil near the creek, and birds nested in the eaves of the barn roof. Tessa had begun keeping a small pot of rosemary on the windowsill. She'd found the seed tucked in the hem of her satchel, a gift she hadn't remembered packing. She watered it each morning, careful not to overdo it. Some things needed patience to take root. Hayes had started building a pen for chickens, using old boards he'd salvaged from the abandoned trapper's cabin 2 miles east. Dorian carried nails in a tin pail, watching every movement with quiet purpose. Daisy followed Tessa through the tall grass, gathering dandelion heads in the hem of her apron. That morning, Tessa found Hayes in the lean-to beside the barn, smoothing a rough plank with a drawknife. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt, and there was sawdust in the lines of his forearm. You're making something, she said. A cradle, he answered. She stepped closer. For Daisy. He looked up. No, for what might come. Color rose into her cheeks, soft and sudden. You're thinking that far ahead? Only if you are. She reached out, ran her fingers along the edge of the wood. It was pine, clean and pale, already shaped into the gentle curve of a headboard. I think about it every night, she said. What it would be like to raise a child in peace. He set the drawknife aside. You'd be good at it. You would too. Hayes didn't speak. Instead, he leaned against the post, arms crossed. She could see the way the light caught the edge of his scar, how it didn't seem to weigh him down as much anymore. He looked at her, not with hesitation, but with a kind of certainty born from long watching. You ever been kissed proper? He asked quietly. Tessa's heart kicked once in her chest. Not in any way that mattered. He stepped forward, slow, careful. I won't do anything you don't want. I want this, she said. She rose onto her toes and touched her lips to his. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't shy. It was the kind of kiss that came not from longing, but from knowing like the space between them had already been filled, and they were just meeting in the middle. When she pulled back, her breath caught on a laugh. You taste like cedar and smoke. He ran a thumb gently along her jaw. You taste like morning. That evening, after supper, Dorian brought a carved figure to her. It was a horse, roughly shaped but sturdy, whittled from a piece of driftwood they'd found near the shallows last week. I made it for you, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Tessa crouched to his level. It's beautiful, he nodded. It doesn't fall over. I can see that. He hesitated. Are you gonna stay now? She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the boy who'd lost his father, but the boy who had begun to trust again. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He didn't smile, just took her hand in his and squeezed once before letting go. Later, as the stars came out and the frogs began to sing in the marsh beyond the grove, Tessa sat beside Hayes on the porch steps. Daisy was asleep inside, curled beneath the quilt Tessa had mended with bits of their old clothes. Dorian lay still, one hand tucked beneath his cheek. "You think they'll remember this part of their life?" she asked. "They'll remember the quiet," Hayes said, "and the hands that held them steady." She leaned against his shoulder. "And what about us?" He took her hand. "We'll remember the way we chose each other, day by day, without ever needing to be asked." She rested her head on his arm. "I never thought I'd be strong enough." "You were," he said. "You just needed someone to see it." The night smelled of damp earth and pine sap. Somewhere, a nightjar called once, then fell silent. They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. The wedding was held on a quiet Sunday morning beneath the cottonwood tree that arched over the far edge of the pasture. Spring had run its fingers through everything by then, grass high to the knees, bees humming thick through the air, the creek running fuller than anyone could remember. Daisy wore a crown of dry sage and early wildflowers, her curls brushed and tied with the last bit of ribbon Tessa had brought from Boston. Dorian stood beside Hayes, his boots polished, his face solemn but unafraid. Pastor Ellsworth had ridden up from West Hollow the night before and slept in the hayloft. His old Bible wrapped in oilskin, the pages worn thin from years of use. Tessa's dress was plain cream muslin, sewn from bolts kept in the back of the mercantile. Not fancy, but it fit her well, and when Hayes saw her walking toward him, led by Daisy's small hand, he stood straighter, his jaw slack with something like awe. "I didn't expect to feel this way," Tessa said softly once she reached him. "What way is that?" "Like I've been walking toward this moment all my life." Hayes didn't answer. He just reached for her hands and held them like they anchored him. The words were short and simple, just like they'd asked. No speeches, no promises they couldn't keep. Just a vow to build what they could with what they had and to carry each other when the days were too long. Afterward, they shared a pie baked with dried apples and a jar of honey passed from hand to hand. The children ran through the grass while Hayes and Tessa sat on the porch steps, arms touching, the sun warm on their backs. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Daisy, curled in the old cradle Hayes had finished just days before, and Dorian, tucked in with a worn book at his side. Tessa lit the lantern in the bedroom and sat down to brush her hair. Hayes leaned in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching her. "You nervous?" he asked. "No," she said, turning to meet his eyes. "I feel settled." He crossed the room slowly, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. When he reached her, he took the brush from her hand and began working it gently through her hair himself. She closed her eyes, listening to the soft pull of bristles, the steady rhythm of his breath. "I never thought I'd have something like this," he said after a while. "A home with someone who sees me." "You have it now," she whispered. They lay down together with the window cracked open, letting in the scent of warm pine and the sound of frogs singing low in the distance. His hand found hers beneath the quilt, their fingers laced like they'd always belonged that way. Weeks passed, then months. Summer arrived with heat that shimmered off the ground and turned the riverbanks lush with green. Tessa planted rows of beans and squash behind the cabin, and Hayes built a new coop for the hens they'd bartered for with salted fish and Daisy's hand-sewn dolls. The children grew, not just taller but steadier, Dorian with a quiet strength that mirrored Hayes, and Daisy more joyful by the week, her laughter skipping like stones across water. One afternoon, while Hayes mended a bridle under the shade of the cottonwood, Tessa came up from the creek path, her skirts damp at the hem and her hands pressed low against her waist. He looked up. "You all right? I think we'll need the cradle again," she said, voice soft but sure. He set the leather down slowly. "You certain?" Her smile reached all the way through her. "Yes." He stood and crossed to her, wrapping both arms around her shoulders, his chin resting at the crown of her head. "Thank you," he said, voice hoarse. She leaned into him. "For what?" "For saying yes." for giving them a mother, for giving me a reason to build something that lasts. She stayed quiet, only holding him tighter. They told the children that evening. Dorian didn't say much, but he leaned his head against Hayes's arm for a long while after. Daisy asked if the new baby would cry a lot, then declared she would be the one to sing it to sleep. When autumn came, the trees blazed gold, and the air turned sharp with the promise of frost. They gathered firewood in neat stacks. Tessa sewed a new quilt from scraps of old shirts and aprons. Hayes added a second room to the cabin, with a window that looked out over the ridge. The baby arrived just after the first snow, a girl with dark hair and lungs strong enough to wake the coyotes halfway up the slope. Tessa named her Eliza, after the grandmother who had taught her to read by lamplight during hard winters back east. Hayes held the child with both arms, his face gone still with something that looked like reverence. They baptized her in the creek once the ice had melted, surrounded by the same pine trees that had watched over them all along. Years passed, but the rhythm of their life held steady. The children grew. The land gave what it could. And every evening, without fail, Hayes and Tessa sat together on the porch steps, watching the sky change colors, their hands still clasped, their shoulders still touching. They didn't speak much on those nights. They didn't need to. Love, once earned, didn't need to be explained. It just needed tending. And that they did together always.